So as I mentioned, today's sermon is more of a dialogue between me and two teenagers in our congregation. Earlier this week, I sent them questions I asked them to reflect on so that we could be in dialogue a little bit, knowing that we might divert from the path of the questions a little bit too. So thanks in advance for their courage in even doing this at all. The questions I asked them were, if you were going to teach this congregation a lesson about courage and fear, what would it be? And where did you learn that lesson? The second question was, has there ever been a time in your life where you were truly afraid and came out okay in the other side? And what do you want to tell us about that? The third is about where they access and use courage in their day-to-day lives. And the fourth is an opportunity just to ask me something. We'll see where that goes. So during the hymn, we decided that Van Hamilton is going to be in dialogue first. So Van, if I can invite you up here.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. So why don't we start with that first question. If you had a lesson to teach this group of people about courage and fear, what would it be?
The lesson I would offer is that courage is not always apparent. It can be really simple things. For example, my mother is terrified of needles, yet she still goes to her doctor's appointments and gets her annual shots. And I think that's courageous. Something else is, like, when you're growing up, the world is unknown, but small children will maybe hold a bug for the first time. That's also courage. I think the lesson of courage in itself is something that is accumulated through personal experiences and through the people around you.
So let me ask you a couple of questions about that answer. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So first, does your mom know that you were going to talk about how she's afraid of needles in front of the crowd?
I had them read it beforehand, so.
So you went right to kind of everyday courage as opposed to saving someone from a burning building or risking your life for what you believe. Why do you think that you were drawn to that kind of courage first?
For me, acts like that I think would be bravery, and I think courage is more of a learning and almost a selfless act. I think the whole kind of the egg thing, I think courage and bravery can be the same thing, but I think courage at the same time is different.
And you talked about it being something that you learned through everyday experience?
Yes.
Can you say something about that?
Well, every day, I'm gonna talk about mental health for a second. I have anxiety and I have depression, so sometimes getting up in the morning for me, that's something that can take courage. Or doing things like going out in front of people and talking. Hey, that can take courage. So there's a bunch of just everyday small things, I think especially for people my age, that take courage. And I'm gonna jump ahead to one point, but there are a lot of things that are going on in the world right now, different events, and I think speaking out about them, that takes courage.
Wow. So. That's a lot. I want to thank you for talking. Well, I want to thank you for saying that sometimes it's courageous for some people just to get out and do kind of everyday things. Get out of bed in the morning. Or I think a lot of people are scared to do something like this. But you're right. For some people, especially if you can't see that they're struggling from the outside, and maybe there's a lot that, in my mind, it gives us an opportunity to give other people grace, because you never know what someone's struggling with. When you said that you were kind of pointing toward everyday life, can we talk about that question for a minute? Where do you think that you are challenged to be courageous most in your day-to-day life?
I think in everyday life, I think the whole experience, something we're taught when we're younger is to not be a bystander if we see something wrong. And now every day, something doesn't go wrong every single day, but say there's something that necessarily isn't morally right. I think saying something in the moment is always difficult, and that's something I challenge myself to do as a Unitarian. So that's what I would say.
Can you think of what would be the most common example for you where you would be challenged to say the right thing or to to stand with somebody and do the right thing, what's the most common example for you at day-to-day life?
I think the most common thing is at my school, it's an alternative school, but I have several friends that are trans, and other people don't understand how the use of pronouns are extremely important. And my friends, because the misuse of pronouns is so common, they've kind of, it really bothers them, but they don't say it, so I try to stand up and tell the person how important it is for them to use the right pronouns. And
how does that turn out for you when you think, this is my work to do, I want to do something that might feel challenging?
Sometimes they don't understand, but my friends really appreciate it, and they'll normally give me a hug afterwards. So I'm happy that they appreciate it, you know?
Yeah, sure. What about the question that I asked around, has there ever been a time in your life where you were particularly afraid, and then after the moment, did you learn something about what it means to be you or to be a person?
My example was, this was when I was younger, and I don't remember the age actually, because I think I might have blocked it out, but our car wasn't parked properly, so it actually started going down our driveway, and I was still in it, and my mom was freaked out because her only child was in the car. And so I tried to use the emergency brake, and instead I put it in neutral, and it started going forward and nearly ran her over. What ended up happening is she managed to jump in the car and stop it, but in the process she hurt her hand really badly, and of course I was freaked out because nearly saw my mom get run over, there was blood everywhere. So what I did is I ran down to the neighbor and got her to help, but there's two courageous acts. My mother saved me, and then I ran down to the neighbor despite being completely freaked out. I didn't know what was going on. I was probably about 10 at the time. So I have a great appreciation for my mother, and I really understand how much parents care about their children. So.
Yeah, that's like a scene from an action movie.
Yeah.
So your instinct was to get help.
Yes.
Is that still the case for you? Where do you, today, let's say that today you were struggling with a question of fear or courage in your life, where would you go for help?
I think definitely people in this church, but also close friends, family, and even neighbors are people for me to rely on.
Oh, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it makes the people in the church feel good to know that there's a that you believe in them. That's a great thing. What about that final question? Do you have something that you want to ask while we're here and nobody's watching?
Yeah, I was wondering how spirituality has lent to maybe your growth in your courage, or maybe how it's changed, I guess.
Can you say that question another way?
Over the years, how has your courage changed with your spirituality?
Here's one thing I notice about myself. I'm kind of a worrier, particularly if I think that there's something, I bet this isn't uncommon, but something that I don't want to do, or a moment that I'm a little nervous or afraid of. And when I sit every day, at the beginning of the day, I always sit down and do prayer and meditation. And one of the things I notice is that I'll see that happening, that moment that I'm scared of that hasn't happened yet, always comes to my mind in that prayer time. And it's interesting how powerful it is, because I don't want it to be in my very serene, wonderful prayer and meditation time, but there it is. And one thing I've learned is that almost every time, the actual thing has been easier than the way I saw it in my mind. And so there's something kind of helpful when I see that scary picture, or that meeting that's not going to go well, or that thing I'm doing for the first time I think I'm going to fail at. Because I've seen it thousands of times, I can remind myself it's never been as bad as you think it is. So while I don't like that bad image coming to my mind, because it's happened so many times, it becomes a teacher too. And I can ask it, are you going to be as bad as I think you're going to be? And normally it says no. Yeah. Anything else?
Nope, I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Van, for being in dialogue with me. Thank you. Okay, Olivia Thompson.
Hi.
Hi. So if it's okay, let's start with the first question that we asked Van, which is if you were going to offer this group of people a lesson on courage and fear, what would your lesson to them be?
Okay. So the first thing I like to say is good morning, everyone. And I think for me, growing up and having like a really good group around me to teach me what courage is what made me the person that I am today. So I think that courage kind of rides on kindness and just being who you are and knowing what the right thing to do is.
So how do you know what the right thing to do is?
Well, what I like to do is I like to think of the scenario and it goes two different ways, and if you do this certain thing, you can kind of see what the outcome would be. So I like to do the right thing and see if the outcome would be right for me.
So how do you know, so in that path, let's say there's a right thing and a wrong thing and it's really clear to you.
Yes.
And the right thing is really terrifying. What do you do then?
Okay, well, for me, like for starters, I have a lot of things going through my head in that exact moment in time, and I like to, again, see myself in the future, regardless of what I'm doing in this second, in this point in time. 24 hours from now, am I going to be happy with the decision that I made yesterday, or a week from now, or 6 years ago? I like to kind of block out what's happening right then and there and look towards the future and see if that will help me.
And what's your success rate?
100%.
All right, that's great. Where do you think you learned about what it means to be courageous, or how did you learn about making hard choices?
Again, I grew up with a great there's people around me, my church, my family, my community, my climbing team, everything around that. It just formed the person who I am today, and they've given me really good examples of what being courageous means.
So I don't know, I did not know what their answers were going to be today, so I don't know if you're going to talk about rock climbing at all. Are you going to talk about that?
Yes.
Okay, all right, because I was going to ask you, because that sounds frightening to me.
It is.
Yeah. What about the question of everyday courage? In your life, not the big, there's a train coming and I've got to save somebody scenario from a philosophy class, but just when you get up from 9 to 5 or when you go to school and come home, what's the biggest challenge you have day to day around courage?
Yeah, okay, so for me, courage is not necessarily something crazy, just like what Van said. It's not always something that's life-risking. So something that I used to struggle with, like I want to say 2 years ago, I was kind of an introvert and I never really talked, and I had a hard time showing my voice and saying that to other people and just speaking out. And the thing that helped me a lot was just thinking about the outcome in the future. And day to day, what I still struggle with a little bit is something that's super simple as just speaking your opinion, which is something that is probably easy for the average person, but for me it's a little bit hard.
So it seems to me you're practicing that skill set right now.
Yeah.
And you seem to be doing a really fantastic job.
Thank you.
Yeah. Have you ever been really frightened and come out okay on the
Yes.
other side?
Well, going back to rock climbing, when you're on the wall, you have to make a decision if you want to go further or if you just want to let go and hit the ground. Obviously, one decision is easier than the other, and letting go and being safe is something that is someone's safety a lot. But courage, for me, is kind of just going one extra hold and going higher and higher and higher. Because when it comes down to it and you're competing, it's something that is really important because every single hold counts. And courage for me, and that specific moment, is just going one extra hold and working harder and training harder for that specific time.
Let's assume that we were going to use this as our metaphor for a sermon.
Okay.
And there's rock climbing and it's something scary, but you're going to take one more hold. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Okay, one more hold. What do you think that looks like for the average person here who's not a rock climber on a daily basis? What would the one more step or the one more hold look like for us?
Yes, so I think that maybe an extra hole would be adding on to a conversation or speaking your opinion or just going that extra mile, I guess you'd say. So it could be just saying something that you probably wouldn't usually say, or voicing your opinion in a conference or during class or everywhere you are, just being present, I guess you'd say.
Being present. Why do you think it's hard to use your voice?
Well, there's a lot of things going on in your head. Like, people could not agree with you. They could completely ignore you. They could not like what you have to say, and they could just completely hate you after that. And obviously, that's usually not the case, but that can happen. And I think that's what holds people back. That's what holds me back, usually.
What's happened to you for the most part when you summon up that courage, you use your voice, maybe like you're doing now or in class, or you speak your opinion on something that you think's a little controversial or you don't know? What happens when you do that?
Usually the outcome is good, because I think that people don't usually think in class to say something about whatever we're talking about, and people take different ways on it, or whatever the topic of conversation is. So for example, US history, there's a lot of things that can go one way or another. It can lead into politics or whatever. And of course, that's not usually like a good topic for school. And I don't specifically say something about politics, but I question my teacher about some things, because I think it's really important for people to like look at a different way for the topic of conversation, which kind of helps people, like, I want to say, look in another light.
So far, if I can just kind of mirror back what I've heard from you, you learn about making good choices and courage from your family, from the church. The idea of that one more hold is important to you because it's the next step. You're not taking 4 or 5 steps at a time, you're taking one in life. And you talked about the importance of using your real voice, even when it's challenging. That's a good lesson, thank you. What about, do you have any questions for the church or for me?
Yes, I have one question for you. How do you come up with sermons every week, and how are they so diverse and different from what you hear everywhere else?
I'd like to say we pay someone to send us ideas. So one of the things that's really great about being part of a team, having Reverend Cantor and Reverend Dana here, is that we can sit down and look at a year together. And so, like this year, we knew that we wanted to talk about courage. And so we got together with a bunch of people on staff and our musicians and the people who do communications, and we sat in a room and tried to think of all the kind of ways that sometimes we get scared or afraid. So we start with a big idea and then look at it and we kind of think, who would be really good to speak about that? And maybe Reverend Cantor says, well, I have a great story for that. Or I said, oh, I had a moment from my life I'd like to talk about. Sometimes they pick it for you, like Thanksgiving or Christmas. But what we try to do, I think, is listen to what the church needs. So the last couple of summers, we've asked the church what they're struggling with. We always try to talk about things that we think are relevant and not just stuff that we're interested in personally. So speaking well takes us listening really well to the church, or at least trying to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thank you. Well, thank you so much to you both for offering us your thoughts about your life, for being vulnerable and honest, for being people who said that you weren't always great at standing up and offering your voice, but doing that just so well today, and for feeding back that the church has been a helpful part of your life there. I'm really appreciative, and thank you for saying yes to being a part of this today.